Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Empathic Leader. And I have a really special guest today that means a lot to me, and I think you're going to enjoy him a lot too. His name is Beck, and I think of him as the quintessential Renaissance leader, in that he's that guy that has both the breadth and depth of knowledge. Whatever leadership thing we're talking about, he's probably been there and done that. Don started out in academia and has been a researcher, a faculty member, a senior executive moving up and out of academia and into other things, and a managing partner in venture funds. So for those of us like me that started out in academia and then kind of made a shift, this is the kind of person that does us good to know and to see what they've done. The interesting thing about Don is he's taken all of his skills and is bringing it back around to those of us in academia. He is the founder of the PhD Academy. And for those who don't know, for those that have extended degrees, PhDs, other kinds of doctorates, people that are very, very educated, sometimes they get to the end of their academic career and realize that they can't stay in academia. But it's not an easy step from academia to corporate, to the real world, because the two can be very, very different. Don is actually choosing to give back through the PhD Academy and helping people that do want to make that transition. It's interesting in academia. It's its own different world, and it almost needs a translator. So I'm glad to know there's someone like Don in the field who is doing that translating and helping to elevate the PhDs and the people that are ready to move into a different area of life. So please welcome Don Beck. I'm so glad to have you here.
Well, good morning, and thank you for that kind introduction.
Absolutely, and every bit's true. Those of us that have gone through academia and thought that's where our lives were going to be, making that pivot is difficult. I mean, both as a career and emotionally. And you've managed to somehow bridge both of those and create a space for us. So,
well, it's a tough world. Actually, it's two worlds. There's the world of academia, and it has a very, very unique culture, as you're well aware of. And then we come out into, you could call it the corporate, you could call it the industrial, not-for-profit government, just the outside of academic world, and it's a different culture. So you're moving from one culture to another. And if you look at let's say the archetypical PhD graduate, about 30 years of age, 25 years in school from K to 12, undergrad, and doing a PhD, that's 82.5% of your life. So you kind of get a little bit encultured.
Yeah.
Well, actually, let's shorten that up and say it's kind of cult-like, like you're really tight within that. By the way, no dispersions about that. I'm just characterizing it as it is.
Yes.
And then wanting or needing to move into another culture where the words are the same, but the dictionary is very different. And it's this transition that I've seen too many people stumble on. And so my mission is, how do I help these people make that transition, prepare for jobs outside of academia so that they can build a successful and rewarding career? But that's not all of it, Melissa. The one more step is society needs their knowledge, skills, and ability. And we need to get them in there where they can practice what has been learned and can deliver it to society.
Yeah.
But I'll just add one more thing to the introduction, then I'll turn it back to you. Is I come at that from the academic point of view, but I'm not purely an academic. So as you mentioned, I've been out, done a little bit out in the work world, in the business world, and out there, what I came face to face with is the travesty of the state of management and how we need to help grow the managers. And I'd like an effective manager that then can become a leader. But if you don't even get through the effective management, it's really tough to move into being a leader. And frequently, because of the advanced degrees, PhDs are tapped on the shoulder early to move into management, and they struggle and fail. So you're right. I'm trying to bring both halves of that together, and I'm having a bit of fun doing it.
Well, all the better. I mean, it doesn't need to be a slog. So it's exciting actually to be able to marry these two things that desperately need each other. That's the other thing. But the big thing that really strikes me with what you're doing is when I talk about empathy, right? We're talking about empathic leadership. What I talk about isn't so much this feeling version of empathy that I feel what you're feeling, but rather that it's about connection and understanding. And you're bridging this gap of connecting and understanding with both groups to bring them together. So you're almost acting as an empathic intermediary, which I think is super cool.
Well, and empathy is really a core thread that runs through it all. And I look at empathy the way you are, which is you're looking at it, which is really the consideration of other and the understanding of other. So if you think about work as a construct, work is purely a human construct. And if you're not really clear on that, just ask your cat, and your cat will tell you all about this concept of work from a feline perspective.
Yeah.
And the work construct is really humans doing things for the benefit of other humans, either solving a problem or helping people make progress. That's almost a textbook definition of empathy. But also often, we don't see people behaving or acting like that. So we can go two directions on this, but first let me talk about out in the work world. Say the example of a manager, where these people are struggling, they're frightened, they're failing, and they're flailing. It's really hard to start to conceptualize and understand empathy because they're so focused on themselves because they're in such a bad place.
Yeah.
Moving back to the graduates. If you look at some of the work that Dave Logan has done on tribal leadership, and you look at the 5 stages of organizational development, academia is stage 3, where it's all about the lone wolf, the primary investigator. They're number 1. I'm great. You're not so great. And that's what graduate students come into. And they're in that environment where they're actually subjugated by the PI. I don't mean this in a negative sense, but just descriptively, there's the PI and they're learning. So they're more in stage 2. When they come out of academia, they come out alone. PhD graduation is probably the only human significant experience for which there is no rite of passage. So people graduate, complete their PhD at essentially any day of the year. So they don't do it as a group. It's not celebrated, and out they come. So yeah. They are in an environment where they have never really experienced or been cultured or learned that empathetic approach of others. But here's the thing, they all desire it because what they're all desiring is that higher self-actualization that comes from doing something and being something for the service of others.
Yeah.
But they don't know how to get there. And it's a tough one. So I'll add one more. So this last weekend, you probably aren't aware of this, but I did a 2-day transformative workshop at the University of Alberta for 24 graduate students. And I took them through, really, it was this whole repositioning of the empathetic approach. Now, many of them were saying, the equivalent of, Don, help me to sell myself better. And the repositioning that I did is, so who are you looking to help? How are you uniquely able to help? What fulfills you? What sort of work do you want to do? And as we worked through the 2 days, that was a real eye opener for them. And many of them, the penny dropped. Oh, that's what I'm trying to do. It's not just getting a job. A job's just the container, right?
Yeah.
So that was an interesting thing to put together. Students don't have a lot of money in their pocket, and putting on a 2-day workshop. Oh, and by the way, I'm coaching them a little bit beyond that as well. This activity attracts costs. So I went out and I raised a grant for them, ran it through the University of Alberta. So they were able to come in and take part in this at zero cost to them.
Which shows a huge amount of empathy for the student situation.
Well,
it's part of
yes. And you look at, I'm absolutely blown away by some of the people in the room. One of the participants, young woman, an artificial intelligence ethicist.
Ooh.
Yeah. And today, she is in an interview for a position. It's an interesting interface between the academic world and the industry world. 85% of it is on the industry side at Northeastern University. She is absolutely the person for this. But you would not be surprised to learn that imposter syndrome was a big impediment for her. So after the end of the second day of the workshop, she stayed behind, and we spent about an hour together kind of coaching her on how do you approach this, what I hope for her is a very positive, life-changing event, going through an interview and hearing the phone ring with the, we'd like to make you an offer.
Well, I hope that does happen for her, and in a way that works out best for her, because that's been, imposter syndrome is, as you know, something I've struggled with and do struggle with. And, even to get that call and say, welcome, you have a job, you still have to have enough self-empathy to be able to say, yes, and I deserve that job. Yes, and I've done all the work, and I can make this happen because I'm not an imposter. I'm real deal. So it's a real thing.
Well, we're all authentic. And the thing about imposter syndrome is, if you look at Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan's work on the gap and the gain, where you have very high achieving people, and by the way, imposter syndrome was first described in high performing women in the early 70s, is the higher the performance, the more that people are aware of what they don't know.
Yes.
They know a lot, but they're now aware of what they don't know. And you start to compare yourself or measure yourself against that, the things that you don't have, the things that you don't know, the things that haven't happened, probably might not happen. And therefore, you're always in a losing state. You're always insufficient, as opposed to if you look at how far you've come and everything that you've achieved, then you're in a winning state. And this is what Sullivan and Hardy are talking about. So imposter syndrome really is driven by how aware you are of how big the world is. Yeah. And therefore, having imposter syndrome is actually a very strong indicator of how powerful you really are, but you just don't realize it. So, yes, it can be paralytic. It can be horrible, and all of us have suffered it. But turn it from a negative into a positive. Yeah, it's there. And how do you do that? How do you use that as a motivator rather than a demotivator? Because really, it's the fear that comes from it. Yes. But if you look at it as an indicator of you're aware of so much that can be done, and that you're powerful, then it becomes an empowering or an enabling force. But that's still hard because it's inside, it's in your head, it's the thing that drives you crazy.
Yes, and it's there all the time. You never, if someone else, I talk about self-empathy and how, if another person talked to us the way we talk to ourselves, we would throw them out in the street. But we can get rid of that other person if someone does talk to us like that. And for us, we're in our own heads all the time. It's really difficult to disconnect there. It's just part of the human condition.
Well, Melissa, I'm glad we went down this rabbit hole a little bit, because it really comes up on the application of empathy within the human experience, and particularly within the workplace.
Yes.
So what we just explored there is what's going on in our own minds. And we also explored that, gosh darn it, everyone except perhaps the most extreme narcissist is going through that and feeling that at that very time, recognizing that and understanding where the fears, anxieties, and the hopes and the desires of the other person are and are coming from, and recognizing that there is this mutually felt, although isolated, imposter syndrome going on in each other's mind. how can you use that to bridge a gap and actually bring people together, knowing that the other person is probably scared out of their mind as well,
Yes.
but just can't admit it?
Yes. Absolutely. So I'm actually going to move a little bit now because you know me, I can go on about this all day long, and probably people
Me too.
about you. Because I appreciate you being here today. What I would like to do is find out a little bit more about your experience with empathy, or a lack thereof, in some of the leadership positions you've held, or in places where you've watched other leaders, or seen how this all comes down. You have a ton of experience. I want to hear more about it.
Right. So one of the areas that popped into my mind when you asked me about that is work that I've been doing in these quasi-governmental, non-governmental structures, not-for-profit organizations, and I've had a fair amount of experience in that. So government-funded research centers. So I've been involved in the conceptualization, funding, and operation, both at an executive director and at a board level, on probably about 6, maybe 7 of those. Also been involved I've done work for both our federal and provincial government, as well as in the for-profit part of the world. But I want to talk about this not-for-profit type world, because it brings up a couple of experiences that we can then start to extend out into the for-profit world. So often these organizations start out with a very strong sense of mission. They're there for a purpose. They're very clear on who it is that they're created to serve. So at the very foundation, it's a very empathetic and high organizationally self-actualizing role. And that's in pure form on day one. And then people come in. And the contrast between a for-profit and a not-for-profit is, well, the profit piece. So the core of the service is something that has to be held front and center throughout the entire life of the organization. What I've seen, and I can give some specific examples, but what I've seen is over time, the organization can lose that empathetic focus on the mission and who they're there to serve and how they serve, and begin to become self-aware. So it becomes about the organization rather than about the mission. And this is where I've seen the failure seems to creep in through the board level. So, you want a great board, so you go and you get these titans of industry to come in and help guide you on the mission. Well, they're in the for-profit world. And, in the Sarbanes-Oxley world, it's, all about shareholder value and all about profit and all about bottom line stuff. Yeah. And you lose that mission and become self-aware. That I've seen as the most common source of ultimate failure and demise of these organizations, is losing their way. Losing their understanding of mission, which at the core is an empathetic construct. Yeah. So that's kind of a general arc. But within these organizations, I've seen some truly powerful leaders, people that I look up to, and I'm just in awe of today, even though some of them I've worked with probably 20 years ago, and I still reflect back on some of the things that we did, some of the things that I saw them do, some of the lessons and the quiet lessons, not formal, but just the observation of what happened. So I was doing work for a department of the federal government, and they brought me in to help them prepare. They're putting together a $100 million debt fund, and they needed some of the stuff that I'd done on the finance in the back end. And in order to do that, I had to have a federal security clearance, and I had to work in-house because the stuff I was working on could not come outside of the office. Well, it sounds like it was a big thing, but it's government's a little bit paranoid about these. Yeah. And I was working with the Director General of Operations, so that's the number 2 in the organization, and David Warnerowski is his name. David is retired. He's still in the community. He's a fantastic guy. We we had a breakfast meeting one morning, and he and I were sitting off to the side, and he said a few words to me that were particularly impactful. So impactful, I remember them very clearly 20 years later. He said to me, Don, have you ever considered a career in public service? Well, I hadn't. PhD, MBA, venture capital, kind of a high testosterone experience up until then.
Yeah.
So it was really through that and David, in recognizing that was probably more than 20 years ago, really crystallized for me in that moment, the in service of others, the how do you help others. Another one, this is when I was, the person, Sandra, was my executive vice president. I was a VP and she was the executive vice president. I was reporting to Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget when I first met Sandra. I had just come into the organization. I'd been brought in to do kind of a restructure of a unit and see if we could reposition the organization for a very significant restructuring. And Sandra came in, and Sandra's younger than I am. And she came in, and we were having our first meeting. Oh, you'll love this. And she said to me, well, you're towards the end of your career. So, basically said, I'm not expecting all that much of you.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no. So, as you know, that's not something that really flusters me too much. Within about a month, Sandra realized that, I'm not one like the others. And her and I worked very, very closely. And I learned a lot from her because she was and is a tremendously empathetic leader on how do you take one of these organizations. The organization that we were in is just under 100 years old. And it was a provincial research organization. Really had moved into that, like the TV program, The Office, a lot of internal bureaucratic inertia and a lot of despondency. And, they were responsible, but, volunteering for accountability, not that often. And the challenge was, how do we help that move forward? And it was a terrific experience. And thanks to some of Sandra's guidance, I was able to learn more and see more about how these type of organizations work, how they function, and how they dysfunction.
Yes, actually, which brings me back to a question on something that you had said earlier, because you were talking about these really super intelligent, PhD students and others that are given these leadership positions and they rise quickly. But even though they might have a ton of intellectual intelligence, their IQs are high, they don't necessarily have a lot of emotional intelligence, which, empathy leads right into emotional intelligence. And this goes back to Daniel Goleman in 1995, right? That, EQ is more important than IQ. So I would like to talk to you a little bit about your leadership experience, again, either yours or stuff that you've seen, and that difference between a leader who's in a leadership position but isn't really a leader, as opposed to those who can lead, because they're really two different things.
They are. I'll share a personal experience with you. And I pause because it's 40 years and it's still a little painful in my memory. So coming out of my PhD and postdoc and in my first faculty position, so national scholar, funded research, building a lab, and the interactions in particular with my first research associate, my first research technician, and absolutely tremendous young woman, and she undertook to do some development of some standardized procedures for us, the documentation of it. And she handed it to me, and it was, oh, great. And I pulled out a pen and started rewriting it in front of her. And I had not realized at the moment how she was taking what I was doing. I thought I was helping.
Yeah.
And I just about crushed her. And I remember that today. So this came out of that experience of, always driving, being at the cutting edge, the number one, peeling back the layers of the onion and going deeper and deeper and being better and better and better. What I'm saying is it was all about me. And in terms of disc communication, I'm a high D communicator, so I tend to be that type of forceful, outgoing. And I realized very shortly, and maybe not in that moment, but very shortly after, that it was more important for me to be effective than to be right. So that was, for me, probably that first awakening of, I cannot continue to operate the way I'm operating because it's not working. Now, was that a aha in a moment that, the sparkle and Don became a wonderful person? This is not a wonderful life. It actually took a long time and a lot of work and a heck of a lot of mistakes. And why did that happen? There wasn't anyone around me that could provide any mentorship advice or coaching or guidance on that. It was really, how do I do that? Oh, and I've stepped on that rake a number of times, and it happens. So that's kind of the early part of the path. Now, later on, I had an opportunity to build a core management team of directors and executive directors. So I had three executive directors, two directors. We use the term executive assistant, but my executive, Alex, she was my right hand and operated at essentially the level that I was operating as a VP. But here's the thing. That entire group, all women, all empathetic, but driven, powerful women. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them were all headed towards the door because of the dominant masculine machismo, the lack of resonance between managers that don't have an empathetic view and high performing, high self-actualizing women that were making them look bad. So yeah. I, as a result of that journey, was able to recognize that incredible potential that they all had, and one by one was able to attract them to my team. Best damn team I ever had.
And there it is.
And with that, what did my role become? So many of them had experienced this kind of lead hand type of management. Person is a manager because they had done the job of everyone who was part of the team. Mm-hmm. They were doing things I had really no idea of what it was that they were actually doing. So the role was to just talk about what our objectives are, set some sort of some guidelines, what's inbound and what's out of bound, and resource them and let them go and check back often. And my role really is to help facilitate their ability to achieve that outcome. It became about them, not about me.
But I have to give you huge kudos in what I'm hearing, because one thing that I do talk about with leaders is the importance of self-reflection and looking at what you're doing, as opposed to just doing the same things over and over because this is how we've always done them, so this is how we're always going to do them. And in both of these situations, you've taken the time to self-reflect and understand where your place was in this micro-universe and what you could do to be the most effective, to be the best leader, and not just the loudest roar in the jungle.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that. I really appreciate that. But the reality was the pain of being ineffective that I was suffering and being aware of that was what the awareness was. So in a way, it was about me, but the only way I could get to where I needed to be for that role was not through me, but had to be through others. But this brings up another thing, Melissa. It's the separation between the professional role and the personal role. And when you're in a job, let's say you're a manager or a leader, you have a professional role, you have a fiduciary accountability, you have a professional accountability, you have a role, and preferably that role is 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. And then at the end of the day, you want to be able to walk out the door, go home, and enjoy the rest of your life. But how many people are you aware of, and it's a far too many people, that are not able to make that separation, and as a result, there is no work-life balance. There's only work. It's interesting if you read, let's say, Adam Grant and not coming to me right now. It'll come to me in a moment, about the management of work-life balance, and how these tools that have arisen to help us, things like email in particular, have in fact become so pattern interruptive, so disruptive of what we do, that we can't get any work done during the day. So we try and run away into the evening, and we do our week in the weekends and the evenings. But with the advent of these darn things that we all, they're never more than a meter away from us. You can't escape it even in the evening.
Well, and then the flip side of that, we're not supposed to bring our personal lives into work. We can't bring our personal life, which is ridiculous. We're human beings. We're going to bring our human beings selves into work. But we're supposed to make that distinction, but then we're not making that distinction on the flip side with not bringing work home.
Right. So the author that I wanted to mention was Cal Newport, in his book Deep Work and A World Without Email, really talks about this. But think about that for a minute. If you do not appreciate and become aware of the personal life of your employees, your life of your employee as a person, things happen. Kids get sick, cars break down, family members pass on, family members get sick, and the ability of someone to perform is hugely impacted by what's going on in their life. So if you expect them to come in and be a cog in the machine or purely a widget, they're not that. We go back to Peter Drucker. He talked about years ago about knowledge workers, and the knowledge worker. We go back to Robert Reich when he was Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. He talked about basically we're moving to two kinds of work, where you'll either be a manipulator of symbolic logic or a burger flipper. So service or intellectual. Look at what's happening now with the rapid advances that we have. We're moving into generative AI and the huge things that are advancing in that. What Reich said, 20 plus years ago is absolutely true today. But the deep advancement always happens with not just knowledge, but the wisdom. And that is the unique domain of a human. And that's where these people have it. Now, if you're not understanding what's involved in we'll call it the care, maintenance, feeding, and growth of the performance of that, I use the pejorative term, machine, it'll break down and it won't work optimally. You've got to know your people. You've got to know who they are and what's going on. And if as a leader, they're not able to comfortably engage you and express you on that, that they can't talk to you about what's going on and say, hey, I'm having a bit of a problem. You know where that one goes. You've probably seen it in some of the consulting work you've done over the years.
Yes, over and over, actually. And one thing I keep trying to bring home is that even if you have the most, Montgomery Burns from The Simpsons, your only priority is the bottom line. Even if that person is that short-sighted. The workers still need to come first for exactly the reason you've said. Otherwise, that machine breaks down. So there's so many reasons for empathy within a business situation that it kind of astounds me that we haven't talked about this more seriously sooner.
Well, think about the overall performance of an organization where you have an empathetic leader. One of the things that an empathetic leader is quite able to do is to realize that they don't know everything, and therefore they're positioned much better to be able to go out and build the complements to the areas that they don't know about. So that now you have a team that is complementary and is much more powerful than even the sum of the parts. In contrast to the, I'm the leader, I make all the calls, I'm in charge, I know everything, do everything, and you're just a minion that I'm going to specify the work and look over your shoulder while you do it. Well, that leads to burnout on all party sides.
Yes, it does. And the last statistics I had been reading were like 35 to 40% of leaders suffer from burnout and have to walk away for reasons like that, because they have to be the loudest roar in the jungle. And it's not necessary, because the nice thing about empathy is if you give it, you'll receive it. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely. And we talk about it. One of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we build it? How do we grow it? How do we teach it? How do we encourage it?
Yes.
And my observation with the work that I've been doing over the last, it's about 10 years now, formally, with students, graduate students in particular, how do we help them become aware of that? So it begins with awareness, and then how do we help them develop that so that as they come out into the working world, whatever that world is, they're now, because of the empathy, they are much better positioned to have a strong work-life balance, higher performance, better enjoyment, higher productivity, and then are positioned that when they do get tapped on the shoulder to move into a supervisory/management role and grow from there. And by the way, that's the path of economic growth within an organization, right? Is moving up.
Yes.
And then leader becomes an attribute and a quality, not something that's written on a business card. So
right.
How do we develop the leadership that they can become? As Sandra used to say, one of her phrases was to be leaderful. How do they become leaderful?
Yeah.
So you only become a leader when the people that follow you will recognize and, basically embrace you as a leader. You can't be promoted to it. It's not there in any job description. Well, it's there in many, many job ads that I see. But the job ads don't define what that means.
Yes. It's like the Don Gannon quote that leadership is an action, not a position.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that really drive me. And I look at this and I go, we have so much need in the world, and the world is, it's like it's spinning faster and faster. Things are changing very quickly. So we actually need this level of nimble, facile skill in order to be able to manage that and move forward. It's not there. We desperately need it. I'm not sure if maybe we're seeing a little bit of backsliding because of the things that Cal Newport talks about, et cetera, about we are diverted and distracted away from where we should be going, and our productivity suffers because of it.
I think however we look at it, we really are moving forward into a very new and very fast world. So either way, we need to double down on the human connections, because the more technology and the more speed that we gain, the more it's going to be the interpersonal connections that are going to make the difference and supercharge the leaders of the future.
Well,
one more question. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure. Well, I was going to say, absolutely. And think back to one of the early comments I made about all work is a human construct, and it's people helping other people solve problems or move forward. And, I'm thinking of your cats, and you could turn to them and ask them about work. And that really encapsulates what you're saying. So your next question.
Because I have one working over here while I'm working here. So yeah, that's
Absolutely.
So final question. If you could name a leader, alive or dead, known or unknown, that had a massive impact on how you lead and what you've done, who would it be and why?
Oh, this is a tough one because the impactful leaders have influenced at a number of different levels. You can look at, my mind goes to Jimmy Carter in his post-presidency life. Now I'm in Canada, right? Mm-hmm. And we know of Jimmy Carter in Canada back in the days when he was a naval officer and he was a nuclear submarine techie engineer guy. And he was working for a time at Chalk River, which is one of Canada's nuclear facilities. Chalk River, by the way, produced a whole bunch of the plutonium that was used in the Manhattan Project. Uh-huh. And the reactor had a runaway, basically a meltdown. And Jimmy Carter was one of the people that not only came in to help figure out how do we save this thing, but he personally went into the reactor to do his, it's like 24 seconds of work, and you had to get out because of the radiation flux. And then I look at what Carter did later in life in terms of working to eradicate guinea worm from the third world. When he began, there were 35 million cases annually, and last year there were 14 suspected cases. So I look at that as, here's a person who did not put himself front and center, although he was a president of the United States. And later in life, Habitat for Humanity, the Carter Center, the work that he did in World Health, all as the most humble guy living in Plains, Georgia that you could ever imagine. So I'm going to say Carter, but I also want to add that in different aspects in different areas of life, always watching for great examples are it's really there, and it's there every day. In terms of more on the commercial side, I even think of people like Ziglar. You can get anything you want in the world if first you help someone else get. And then lastly, so you asked me for one, I started with Carter. I told you a little bit about Ziglar, but I would say one of the people that I look to almost every day, I open my email and I look for his blog, is Seth Godin. Yes. Seth is empathetic. He's a marketer. He's just a great guy. I love reading his stuff, and I love reading his books, and I love listening to when he's online. So that's it for me. So Jimmy Carter and Seth Godin.
And Ziglar.
Yeah, and Ziglar stuff comes in through Seth.
Which is perfect. And I agree. Carter, because of the way he led by example, and Seth, he's the kind of guy that if I was going to sit down and have appetizers and talk to somebody and just pick their brain, he's the kind of guy I would want to sit and talk to, because there's a lot going on there. So, Don, this has been a delight. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and for setting the example for everybody. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. And, if any of the listeners happen to find themselves in late stage PhD and they're wondering, well, what the heck do I do now or do next? I'd love to talk with them. I'm not going to sell them anything. I just, as you know, very interested in talking with them. But also, some of your listeners that are in executive positions may have sons and daughters or grandsons and granddaughters that are in an advanced degree and maybe thinking, oh my gosh, with all that training, I can't wait to see what kind of job they get. you might be surprised to learn that there's quite a number of impediments between that. Like to see people get out in the working world, start to accumulate some wealth and, have a house, have a family, and oh my goodness, maybe even grandchildren. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd love to talk with them as well about what can we do to help their kids and their grandkids get the career that they've been working for and they absolutely deserve. A rewarding career that satisfies not just the pocketbook, but also the higher aspirations of what they want. And if they want to do that, easy to reach out to me, don@donback.com.
Absolutely. And we're going to be linking all of your information in the show notes as well. So if anybody does want to get a hold of Don, please do. Or if you're not sure how to do it, reach out to me and I'll connect you.
Good. So, happy to help. Thanks, Melissa. This has been great.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great.